5 basic principles, starting with popular sovereignty, limited government, separation of powers, and then this one gets kind of long because you talk about the 3 branches. Okay. So we talk about Article 1 of the Constitution, legislative branch, and their role. These are separation of powers, so it's their role to make the laws, and they have some other functions as well. Executive branch is to carry out the law. That's the president, vice president, and then the Supreme Court, and then I actually drew this on the board for you yesterday. You got the Supreme Court, appellate courts. There's 13 of those, 12 regional. So the country's divided up into 12 regions. We're in the 10th Circuit, Kansas is, okay? That court is actually in Denver, the 10th Circuit. 9th Circuit's on the West Coast. It's in San Francisco, okay? So it's divided up around the country, these circuit courts, okay? 94 district courts. We have one in Wichita. And then these are some special courts that you don't really deal with very often. So this is what was created by the Constitution. All of these were created by Congress afterward. Okay, so these aren't really in the Constitution, only this. Okay, and then states created their own courts as well. Here's just another a picture of that. Okay, so there's your federal side, 1394. These are your state Supreme Court, state appeals courts, and local trial courts, and then these are those special courts. We'll do that again in the when we get to the judicial branch. Okay, so your 4th basic principle of the U.S. Constitution after separation of powers is checks and balances. You guys have all heard of this, right? Checks and balances. Okay, it's really not as complicated as you think it might be. Okay, it's actually pretty easy to figure out. Okay, one of the things you do need to be able to differentiate, though, guys, is this: the difference between separation of powers and checks and balances. So the key word in differentiating the two is this: restraint. So checks and balance mean the ability to restrain the other 2 branches. Got it? Restraint. Okay. So the executive checks the legislative. Anybody give me an example of that? How the president can check Congress. Veto. The V word. Coach Lawbon would say. Veto. Okay. I don't know if this was one of your vocab words or not, but it means to reject. Okay. Congress passes a law, passes both houses of Congress, send it to the president. He's got to sign it for it to go into law. If he doesn't like it, he vetoes it. Can Congress do anything about that? Can they check back? Can Congress check back against the president? How? Enough votes, a supermajority. So, 2/3 in both houses check back, override the veto. Does that ever happen? Yes. Okay. You guys remember George W. Bush? You know that he's our president for 8 years, from 2000 to 2008. Okay. In 8 years, George W. Bush vetoed 2 bills. That's it. One of the bills he vetoed was government funding, your tax dollars, government funding of embryonic stem cell research. You guys ever talk about embryonic stem cells? Okay, so they use aborted babies' stem cells to do research, to do stem cell research to help maybe create some cures for things like childhood diabetes or Parkinson's disease. Now, further research has shown us that umbilical cord stem cells or adult healthy stem cells are just as effective as embryonic stem cells. Abortion is not illegal in this country, So if Congress passed, funding for embryonic stem cell research, that means they're using your dollars to do research on aborted babies. You understand? George W. Bush vetoed that. And Congress overrode that veto with a 2/3 majority in both houses. Okay? So the government took our money and used it for research on that. Okay? Private research of that is legal too. And that's what Bush was saying. He's like, look, if private companies want to do that, but I can't ask the taxpayers of America to pay for something that goes against their religious beliefs. I guess Congress didn't care. Okay? So they overrode his veto. Is that a good example? You follow that? Okay? That's how our system works. Checks and balances. Okay? So it forces each branch to kind of consider what the other's going to do before they act. Okay? So if Congress doesn't consider the president's opinion, he may veto it. Okay? The power to reject laws encourages the two to work together before bills are passed. All right, that communication. Give some more examples here. Okay, that's just what we talked about. Okay, so president's power is limited over Congress. Congress can override a veto with 2/3 vote in both houses. All right, and we talked about this yesterday. Only the House of Representatives has the power of the purse. So, generally we talk about Congress has the power of the purse, but if they're going to spend your money or tax you, it has to start in which house? The Senate or the House of Representatives? House of Representatives, okay? And then we talked about this yesterday. Senate can reject presidential appointments. So President Biden picks somebody for the Supreme Court. The Senate can reject that, okay? Or they can approve it. But they do have the power to check the president on those issues. And I talked about this yesterday too. Okay. International treaties, you need a 2/3 vote in the Senate. Okay. So another easy one here that I think is probably going to be on the next slide is when Congress passes a law and then somebody challenges that law in the courts, and the Supreme Court says that law is unconstitutional. It violates the Constitution. It cannot be enforced. Okay? So I actually have a really good graph in here when we're ready to go to the next slide. Oh. Seriously?
Yeah.
You did check in with you?
Yeah.
Is that algebra?
Yeah.
Yeah. You understand it?
Yeah.
Good. Ready? Connor? Okay. Yeah, so this guy's right here shows you pretty much every check and balance in our system. Okay, so you got 3 branches here. Okay, this is actually, I mean, this is a wonderful slide. Whoever created this, I did not create it. So, you got Congress, legislative branch, House of Representatives, Senate. House and Senate can veto each other's bills. So if the House passes a spending bill, the Senate can not pass it. Does that make sense? You got to pass both houses. Okay. You got the president, executive office of the president, cabinet, government agencies, courts, Supreme Court, appeals courts, district courts. Okay. So let's start here. Congress approves the presidential nominations, controls the budget. It can pass laws over the president's veto and impeach the president and remove him or her from office. Okay. President can veto legislation. All right, let's go over here. Senate confirms the president's nominations for the courts. Congress can impeach judges and remove them from office. And the court can declare laws unconstitutional. The president nominates the judges. The courts can declare presidential actions as unconstitutional. Example. You guys heard of the Trail of Tears? Remember who was president? Andrew Jackson. Okay. Andrew Jackson was removing Cherokee Indians from Georgia, the state of Georgia, forcing them to move west. Yes? The Supreme Court told President Jackson, you can't do that. What you're doing is unconstitutional. Andrew Jackson's reply to the court, well, then come down here and stop me. What can the Supreme Court do to stop the president? Remember, the president is the only one with the sword to enforce decisions. How do you stop the president? Congress does. Congress can impeach the president to stop him. Did Congress impeach Andrew Jackson? No, because they agreed with what he was doing. Now, guys, 99.9% of the time, when the Supreme Court says an act is unconstitutional, the executive branch follows it. Okay, so if they declare a law unconstitutional, then the executive branch generally does not enforce that law. They stop enforcing that law. You with me? Okay. But the Supreme Court can't enforce its own decisions. They have to rely on the other 2 branches to do that. Okay? And it usually works. In the case of the Trail of Tears and Andrew Jackson, it did not. Okay? What we got here? Okay. Yes, this is important. Okay. So this is part of your checks and balances. We've been talking about how the Supreme Court can declare acts of the executive and laws of the legislature unconstitutional. This process is called judicial review. Okay, I know you learned this as juniors in history class. Okay. Now, originally, the first Supreme Court, and this is the Supreme Court building, by the way. So you guys might have saw it when you were in D.C. That building was not built until much later. So the first Supreme Court, guys, met in the unfinished basement of the U.S. Capitol. And they did not have this power of judicial review originally. So John Jay, who was the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, ended up quitting. He could have served for life, but he quit. Said, I'm going to go do something else. the judicial branch has no power. That changed eventually, okay? So the power of the courts to decide if laws or actions are valid. If the law is invalid, it's unconstitutional. The law or the act can no longer be enforced by the government. This only happens when laws are challenged. So guys, there has to be a victim of the law. Congress can pass a law today that's unconstitutional. Everybody knows it's unconstitutional. But until somebody is a victim of that law and challenges it in courts, only then can the courts decide it's unconstitutional. The Supreme Court can't come in just right after Congress passes a bill, the president signs it into law, and they say, no, you can't do that. Somebody has to challenge the law. You with me? It's got to be a victim. So guys, Roe versus Wade, right? 1973. Who was the victim of the abortion law? Well, Roe was. So Roe was the person that challenged the law. Brown versus Board of Education, 1954. Brown was the victim. His 3 daughters that went to the school on the wrong side of the tracks in Topeka, Kansas, his 3 daughters were the victim. And he sued on behalf of his daughters that segregation in schooling or segregation in general is unconstitutional, violating the 14th Amendment of equal protection under the law. There's got to be a victim, okay? Somebody's got to challenge it. Now, as I was saying, originally, judicial review is not mentioned in the Constitution. You know where it's mentioned? It's mentioned in the Federalist Papers. Okay, specifically Federalist number 73, written by Alexander Hamilton. Okay, we read 71, we didn't read 73. Okay, but in that paper, they talk about this power of the court. And so there was a case in 1803. Okay, so Article 2 kind of implies this power. Federalist Paper number 73 reinforces that implication. And so this court case, Marbury versus Madison in 1803, gave the Supreme Court judicial review. Okay, so it went from a very weak of the 3 branches to a very powerful 3rd branch. Okay. So what was the name of the court case that gave the court judicial review? Marbury versus Madison. Okay. That should appear in multiple places on your test. Like in your essay and at other parts of the test. Okay. And so now the court has this power. And it is a very important role that they play. Okay, so that's the end of checks and balances. So right now, looking at this, first paragraph, popular sovereignty, is not very long. Your second paragraph, body paragraph, limited government, not very long. Separation of powers, you're talking about the powers that each of the 3 branches have. Legislative makes the laws, executive enforces the laws, judicial branch can interpret the law. Then you get your 4th paragraph with its checks and balances. This is where you talk about those actual checks, the ability to restrain the other branches. Okay? Veto, the override of the veto, declaring laws, actions unconstitutional, appointing judges, confirming judges, these sorts of things. Okay? Then your 5th basic principle of the U.S. Constitution is federalism. And we've talked about federalism in here before, yes? But picked on people on this? Like, Michael, can you define federalism? We haven't done that? Okay. It's here in parentheses. Okay? Powers shared or divided between national, state, and local governments. Remember, guys, we're going from a confederal system with our old Constitution where all the power was in the states. National government had no power. Now we're giving the national government power, and we're sharing that power with the states and the local governments as well. You guys remember this? We've done this a few times, talked about this, okay? Now, what Article 4, or this actually Article 6 talks about is federal supremacy. So if you have a state law and a federal law that are different, which law outweighs the other? The national government law wins. Yes? If you have the U.S. Constitution versus a state constitution, which one is supreme? The U.S. Okay? So in the end, guys, the U.S. Constitution is the supreme law of the land. That is our law. Okay? State constitutions are important as well, but they cannot violate U.S. Constitution. Okay? So that's in Article 6, the supremacy. Okay, now, the next chapter we cover, guys, chapter 4, will be all about federalism. That relationship between national government, state, and local government. Okay? It's a good chapter. I like it. Okay? So states can't carry out powers that are given to the national government. Kansas cannot print its own money. Kansas cannot declare war on Canada, as much as we may want to save them from their own government. So that's your fifth body paragraph. Good? Here's your essay. How many slides is that? 10 slides. Okay. All right, that's a good stopping point for today. I got a bunch of crap to do, so